I'll say a bit more from Jonathan Godfrey's email. If everything's done under the hood, then the reality check of minimizing common practice to users is immaterial. Jonathan says, I believe improvements in access will come because authors, ordinary people, don't need to think about access because it's got built into them, because it's built in for them. So that's certainly the gold standard for what we want, is that they just write in an ordinary way, and they'll get some level of accessibility that might be satisfactory, and we do the best. Jonathan then goes on to say, the question then is, which option gives the greatest potential for the needs of the next 30 years, some of which are almost certainly unknown to us today? I will be looking for a solution that offers this universal design feature. And he gives the example of PDF and HTML, and EPUB is HTML with serious bells and whistles, and they need extra information to work properly. He then goes on to screen readers, and when we write \bar in curly braces X, we put a bar on top of an X. And Math Player interprets this as the conjugate of X. And by that, they mean the conjugate complex number of X. But Jonathan, as a statistician, means it interprets that as the mean value of the random variable X. So there's no way currently for that interpretation by Math Player to be made context sensitive. And that's what he means by post-processing. So he's thinking of Math Player as providing post-processing. And if the symbol is tagged, then there's a chance that the correct contextual definition can be added at some point to increase accessibility. And that point might be at the point at which you realize there was a problem. Somebody told you there was a problem. Yes, I am aware the end user could reprogram Math Player to say the correct thing, but how can the end users be sure that they have done so correctly in every context? So that point of view, I think, is that where possible, it's the system's responsibility to ensure accessibility, just as it's the system's responsibility to ensure that the characters being used appear in the font that's being used, and so forth. So I am worried when a solution talks of post-processing, especially if that exercise is a black box which the user cannot hope to control. The worst outcome that arises is when we are given access that, the worst outcome that arises when we are given access is that we are misled by that access. So that's like the clock that stopped and its hands aren't set to noon. You always set the hands of a stop clock to noon so that nobody looks at it and thinks, oh, it's 3:15. So from my point of view, the rich DVI file is a bit like the negative of an old-fashioned camera, and you can process that negative in all manner of ways. But I think there's a real need right now to not miss the boat or to try and catch up, because Microsoft Word, I'm told, isn't bad for stuff that isn't mathematical. And from the blind programmers list, I know that Microsoft is, as a company, and it's a big company, putting a lot of effort into programming tools being accessible. And they have a researcher that's doing work on teaching programming to visually impaired school children. I went to Raspberry Pi Foundation seminar on that. So Microsoft has got resources and will, and the tech community doesn't have resources. I think it's got will. And it's got a tremendous loyalty from groups such as ourselves, people such as ourselves. So I think that one of the key topics is developing a community of practice. That the outcome I'm seeing now as taking us forward are, the one of them is making effort now to solve accessibility problems, not putting everything off forever. And in that context, there's the pretext software that comes out of the American Institute for Mathematics, and Rob Beezer is the name I associate with that. That is authoring in DocBook XML and is capable of producing Braille outputs, which are very valuable to some blind people, and multiple other outputs as well. And most of the pretext system is output agnostic. So it will produce PDF through LaTeX, it will produce EPUB through other means. So that's part of the things that are going on now. So I think that there's, let me say that Jonathan Godfrey shares his views to the Blind Math List and has been doing so for many years. And the LaTeX team share their views, and the tech community shares their views. And to a certain extent, I think what we need to do is unify the bubbles, or at least have the bubbles communicate with each other. So Jonathan Godfrey's got a common sense and very direct way of looking at things that comes from his years of experience. And the people that are trying to improve accessibility in the tech community can benefit greatly from that. And similarly, when we're trying to improve accessibility, we can benefit from the experience of people who have disabilities.
It hadn't really struck me before about how context sensitive some of the mathematical notation is, despite the fact today I was teaching, and I think I was doing transpose, and I said you'd normally use like a to the power t to indicate transpose, but you might use a prime, and but from the context you'll be aware of what it means. You wouldn't use a prime, for example, if you're looking at differential equations, where it would probably mean differentiation. So we actually have quite a few mathematical symbols that actually are. Mean is another one with the X bar, as you said, and complex conjugate, which I was teaching yesterday. I think that was complex conjugate. So in a sense, it would be better, and this is because LaTeX is set up for the essentially as type for typesetting, as opposed to always conveying what the mathematical meaning is. So, for example, I mean, I've seen, you know, we have the nabla for the upside down delta means that we use for div, grad, and curl, for example. I quite often actually write my own new commands that say div, grad, and curl, just because it then makes it easier for me to write the documents, as opposed to putting nabla squared or nabla cross. And actually, it'd probably be helpful if in LaTeX we actually had more mathematical meaning in those symbols, as opposed to just using what are the typesetting symbols. And I don't know whether that would be something that people would evolve, whether that would be necessary. With things such as deep learning, you would imagine that actually that could take into account context in making some kind of translations.